People are getting sicker every year. Our life expectancy is going down in the United States, despite spending more than any country in the world. And the reason for this is because we're not focusing on that core foundational process that's making us sick, which is...
Dr. Casey Means is a Stanford-trained physician and author of bestseller Good Energy. What food is going to be nourishing us? What food should we kind of be pushing more towards?
I think there's 5 main ones that I think about that I actually try and include in almost every meal. And I think about a lot of the ultra-processed food that we think is bringing us happiness and we think makes us feel good. It's actually bioengineered to hijack our reward circuitry in our brain and cause us to desperately want it. It's an experiment that has failed.
If you could inspire everyone listening right now to engage in your vision of health, what would be the first thing you'd encourage our listeners to start doing?
The first thing that absolutely comes to mind is...
I'm your host, Sarah Ann Macklin, and I'm on a mission to uncover the maze of health myths around nutrition and well-being and guide you through my 7 pillars of health. Join me on a journey of discovery and connection and pull up a pew for a front row seat to the most exclusive health conversations of our time. Welcome to Live Well, Be Well. I've loved watching this community grow and especially starting to meet you all in the comments section. But one thing, although our views are going up, our subscribers aren't. So I'd love for you to hit the subscribe button as a thank you if you've enjoyed any of our episodes. It allows us to bring bigger, more exciting guests and more continuous content. So if you've enjoyed it, just like a gentleman's handshake, please do subscribe. Casey, welcome to Live Well, Be Well. I'm so happy to have you here.
I am so excited to be here. Thank you for having me.
So I want to start with quite kind of a wide question because you've dedicated, especially like the last few years of your career, to enhancing good metabolic health. Now, we're going to go into what that is in a minute because that term might overwhelm some people. They might just think automatically weight loss, but it's not. It's much more than that. And I wanted to start the conversation before we understand what that is, that if you could inspire everyone listening right now to engage in your vision of health, what would be the first thing you'd encourage our listeners to start doing?
I love this question so much. The first thing that absolutely comes to mind is to start from a place of joy and a place of awe for the human body. Like everything I do and all my passion for metabolism is rooted in stepping back and just thinking and meditating a little bit on this crazy experience we have to be alive. Like it's absolutely bonkers. And I think in our Western culture, UK, US, it's like we're so busy. We're constantly on our devices. We're constantly moving. It's productivity obsessed. It almost like stops us from even having like the 5 minutes to just sit back and be like, we're in an expanding, eternal, infinite universe. And we are here for a short period of time in this body with this consciousness. And this is freaking amazing. And so I think when we can kind of like do that and get outside a little bit more, something shocking I have learned in researching for my book and my newsletter is that the average person in the Western world now spends almost 94% of their time indoors, in the 4 walls of their home or in a car. And it's like, we are meant to be outdoors. We are a part of nature. And I think there's this sense of like disconnection from both the miracle of life because we're so busy in our hustle culture and we're not really connected to our source, which is nature, which we're totally a part of. And we're constantly, our bodies are constantly exchanging matter and energy with the environment throughout our entire lives. And so that's where I would start, to be honest, because I think from that place, not a place of fear of death or even, I think the longevity conversation sometimes gets a little bit too much about the attachment to an outcome of a long life. Like, let's just root it in like we have today and we're alive and our bodies, for some reason, we're not a puddle of atoms on the ground. We have an animating life force that holds us together as a Casey, and like it, and it's like, I that's where I start. And that is why honestly I love, and we'll talk about metabolism, but that's why I'm so passionate about metabolism, because it is that animating life force. It is not about weight. It's about the way the body makes energy to keep the body, alive, and also to power every single thing that's happening in our body 24 hours a day for our entire life that allows us to have health. It's the foundation of all health. So my desire to support metabolism fundamentally comes from a wanting to honor this miracle of life.
I think it's beautiful. I just love that you started that with joy, which you use in your new book, which is Good Energy, which is also, by the way, on an Amazon bestseller list. So that's amazing. And it's incredible because I love the term good energy. And I want to delve into that because just to give people a bit of a background, you're a Stanford-trained physician. You used to be a surgeon, and now you've gone way more into prevention. And we'll talk about why that is, because it's quite it's a really beautiful personal story that's made you kind of look more at this more intensely. But the reason why I say it is because I'm very focused on prevention as well, and I think a lot of our listeners are. But when I read the book, there's some quite scary stats in the book about currently where our health is in the Western culture. But in parallel with that, we live in this kind of, and you mentioned it perfectly, this optimization culture where longevity seems to have completely lost its way in the conversation. So I want to start really with the title of your book, which is Good Energy, which links very much to joy. So can you help us understand, why did you call it good energy? What does this term mean? And how can we link that with good metabolic health? And also, what does that mean? How do these two things go together?
Yes. Yeah. So I think for me, the title captures three main things. The first is this idea of energy and metabolism. And so to just sort of briefly mention what I mean by metabolism. So essentially, metabolism is the core foundational process in the human body. It is the foundation of all health. And the reason for that is because the body is a big machine of 40 trillion cells, and each one of those 40 trillion cells is doing trillions of chemical reactions every second. And the bubbling up of all those chemical reactions is our life. That's what it is. It's trillions upon trillions upon trillions of chemical reactions happening every second that all together generate our health and our consciousness and our life. And every single one of those needs energy to pay for it. And that energy is cellular energy, which we call ATP, which people probably remember from high school. But ATP is like the coin that we use to insert into the machine to pay for each of these reactions. ATP is made through metabolism. And what it comes from is food. So metabolism is the conversion of the literally 50 metric tons of food we eat. I don't know what that would be in, I don't know if we use
don't
tons
make me do the maths
in the UK.
right now.
Yeah, but it's a lot. It's like
side.
a football field. Yeah. So like a huge amount of food, like a ship worth of food in our lifetime. And metabolism is how we take that food, which is potential energy from the environment, and convert it to usable energy in the body. And so the reason I say it's the foundation of all health is because without energy, you can't make the hormones. So some people say, well, hormones are the root of all health. Well, actually, there's a layer deeper, because if without the energy, you can't do anything. And so we got to get the energy production right. And in the Western world, Europe, US, metabolic health and metabolism is actually doing very, very poorly right now. And this is a modern phenomenon. And the reason is because our industrial, urbanized, modern environment with the ultra processed food and the constant low grade stress and the toxins in our environment and the fact that we're indoors all the time, all these things are actually, they actually hurt our metabolic processes, our lack of sleep. So in the US, this is showing up as our obesity epidemic. This is showing up as our diabetes epidemic. This is showing up as, 50% of adults having prediabetes or type 2 diabetes, and almost 80% of people being overweight or obese. And so these are representations of this underlying issue with how our body is converting food energy to cellular energy. So that's why the book is called Good Energy, because I think, having been inside the healthcare system as a surgeon and really seeing the inner workings, what became super clear is that we're not actually addressing the core issue that's making people sick in the modern world. We're actually addressing the downstream symptoms of that root cause problem. And we have over 100 specialties in the US. We have all these specialties. You know, you might go to the cardiologist or the endocrinologist, the internal medicine doctor, the dermatologist, the ophthalmologist. And we're just going through all these revolving doors. But actually in our country, in the US, people are getting sicker every year. Our life expectancy is going down in the United States, despite spending more than any country in the world. And the reason for this is because we're not focusing on that core foundational process that's making us sick, which is essentially energy production. So the vision I have is that if we can really understand metabolism, each of us individually, why it's so important, and then understand how to make good energy in our cells, a lot of our symptoms and risk for diseases will decline. So that's sort of the first piece. And then just very briefly on the second piece of why it's called good energy. We think about good energy, I think, in that more heart-centered way of like the vibes and the energy we're projecting into the world. And I think one thing that's really fascinating is that the way we feel psychologically and the sort of the energy that we're bringing on that mental level, that actually also has a really strong impact on our metabolic health, how our cells make good energy, because our cells hear every thought that we're thinking. You know, it's translated through biochemistry and neurotransmitters and all nerve impulses. So if we can actually start with some of the positive self-talk and the self-love and really actually making sure that we are trying to engender a sense of safety and good energy in our own minds, it actually has a profound effect on how our cells do metabolic processes. Because a cell that is under a sense of threat is a cell that's going to divert resources towards defense and alarm and not towards health. And one of the biggest sources of threat, I think, in our bodies is actually our own way that we talk to ourselves. And so we just need like really focusing on good energy in our minds is so important for metabolic health. And the third piece is that when all of this is working well, when we get our cellular energy production, our metabolic health under, towards good energy, we then are able to actually project more good energy into the world. And the reason for that, we actually know that so many of the mental health issues that we're facing in the world right now actually tie back to an underpowering of cells, basically metabolic dysfunction in our brains. We know now that depression, anxiety, ADHD, fibromyalgia, migraines, even dementia, a lot of these brain conditions, when we trace the physiology, many of them are directly linked to how well our brains are actually able to do metabolic processes. You can imagine an underpowered sort of cell in the brain is not going to be as functional. And that can lead to so many of these sort of more emotional health issues that we're facing today. So I would say the hopeful news on that is anyone dealing with struggles with mental health, metabolism is a place that's very actionable that we can help improve the situation. So that's why the book's called Good Energy, and sort of an overview of why this metabolic framework for disease as a root cause factor, I think, is actually really urgently needed as a reframe in our system, because the way we're practicing medicine right now, at least in the US, it's not leading to the outcomes we want. We're doing worse as time goes on and the more we spend. So we need to reframe on what's actually connecting diseases, not just play whack-a-mole with the downstream symptoms.
I want to share something that's helped my skincare routine, the SUPERCHARGE Red Light Face Mask. Red light therapy is fantastic for your skin because it helps reduce inflammation and increases collagen production, making your skin look healthier and more youthful. The SUPERCHARGE Red Light Face Mask uses the optimal wavelengths of red 630 nanometers and infrared 850 nanometers light to deliver these benefits. Now, someone in my early 30s, wrinkles aren't a huge issue yet, but the minor lines I did have are already smoothed out. And what really surprised me was how well this mask works for acne. It helps settle the acne quicker and reduces any dark spots afterwards. It's been a real game changer for those unexpected breakouts. Now, prevention is key for me, and using this mask is a great step to help reduce the signs of aging. It's also become vital in my self-care routine. And during this time, I incorporate the meditation practice, making it one of my favorite times of the day. So if you're curious about how red light therapy can help your skin, I highly recommend giving it a try. Go to boncharge.com/livewell and use the code LIVEWELL for 15% off your order. You explained that really beautifully, and it's something that I talk about so much on nourishing our bodies, but also nourishing our minds with how we talk to ourselves, and how that those two things come together have such a big impact. And emotional health, I believe, is really sorely overlooked. And that's what I loved about kind of looking at the work that you're doing, is that you're entwining these two concepts together, but on a cellular level. Now, I really believe so many of our listeners will relate to so much of what you're saying, where now we have the NHS in the UK, and I know it's very different in America, but we ultimately have quite similar healthcare systems where it's kind of you go to the doctor once there's a symptom, there's a problem, right? And I think many of us have been lost down these kind of tracks of, okay, well, I've maybe got IBS or IBD, I'll see a gastroenterologist, and you see that one person, and then you kind of get, put on medication or told, the protocol of how you manage that type of disease. What I love about what you're doing is kind of taking it right the way back. And you've mentioned there, like your metabolic protocol. So I really want to start there. So if people are kind of listening to this, you mentioned again about anxieties. That's another one of these kind of chronic health conditions that so many people suffer with. And you wrote a stat in your book, more than 19% of adult women take antidepressants. So thinking about this kind of like subgroup, 26% of women suffer from conditions like polycystic ovary syndrome, PCOS. So thinking about all of these different subgroups that are listening to the show now and all kind of manage their condition in whatever way, form, where should they be starting thinking about this and what you're saying? Like, what would be their kind of first step into this protocol that you've developed?
Oh, well, I would say the first step, I think, first step is always tuning into what your body's telling you. So before we get into lab testing and wearables and all that stuff, I think, to me, always important to say that the best biomarker or biofeedback that we can possibly get is just literally slowing down and being with ourselves in a calm environment and hearing what our bodies are telling us. Because when we have a symptom of any kind, mental or physical, a symptom is the body's way of trying to communicate with us that its needs are not getting met. And that's so different than I think how we're trained to think about symptoms, because in our cultures, it's like you have a symptom, we need to squash it. You have a headache, here's the ibuprofen. You have the reflux, here's the Nexium. You have the rash, here's the cortisone cream. You have the nasal congestion, here's the steroid spray for the nose. It's like, how do we just squash it? But really, that's actually antagonistic to the body. And if you end up wanting to really alleviate a symptom, that's fine. But first have that conversation with the body of like, where are your needs not being met? Because if the needs of the cells are being met, often symptoms just melt away. And so that's step one. And I think step two is thinking about, well, how do I meet the needs of my cells? And, I think that piece is really going into those different pillars of all the ways we can essentially communicate with our cells to meet their needs. Of course, one of them is food. So, the main pillars and we can talk about these in more detail later, but I really think about the modifiable factors of the way that we can essentially put our cells into different environments to help meet their needs and not overwhelm them. Go into food, how we sleep, how we move, our emotional health and stress, the way we interact with toxins in the environment, the way we interact with light, and actually the way we interact with temperature. So those are kind of the things the knobs we can turn. And so that's step one, tuning in. And I think that's actually one of the hardest things in our culture, because we are so fast paced, and women, I think, especially feel this relentless sense of having to do more that we sometimes totally ignore our bodies. But that's one. To get more practical, I think that actually doing some basic lab testing to understand whether metabolic issues might be at play in whatever symptom you're dealing with can be such a helpful place to start. And there's really basic, often free, really easy to get tests that can give you a sense of how well your body's making energy. And the ones that I love, again, very basic, and the sky's the limit with lab testing, but I like to see a fasting glucose. I like to see a hemoglobin A1C, which is a long-term marker of blood sugar. I like to see a triglyceride level, which is a part of the cholesterol panel that tells us how much blood sugar is actually being converted to fat. I like to see HDL cholesterol, which is what we often call the good cholesterol. It's like what takes cholesterol from the bloodstream back to the liver for processing. I like to see a waist circumference and a blood pressure. So these are actually the basic tests that define what we call metabolic syndrome. And so, and the ranges are a little bit different in the UK. But in sort of in US terms, we'd want to see a fasting glucose less than 100, an HDL above 40 in men or 50 in women. We want to see a triglyceride less than 150, hemoglobin A1C less than 5.7%, waist circumference less than 35 inches in women and 40 inches in men, and a blood pressure less than 120/80. So based on our criteria of what metabolic syndrome is, if all of those are true for you, you're less than those amounts for all of those and not on medication, that is considered optimally metabolically healthy. And what's wild is that only 6.8% of Americans fall into that criteria now. So having all those 6.8%, 98.2% of Americans have one of those not in that optimal range. So that's a place to start, is like, see if you're in that 6.8%. And the beautiful thing is that all of these biomarkers can change in 1 to 2 months if you're working on really building metabolic capacity through those pillars that I mentioned. So they're very actionable. It's not a one-way street on metabolic dysfunction. It's very, very much something we can move back and forth on that spectrum. So that's step one. There's a few other tests that I really like to see that can give us more information about our metabolic health. And there's about 6 that you can also ask your doctor for, but one is a fasting insulin level. This is a great test because it tells us how hard our body's having to work to produce this hormone insulin to basically get our blood sugar out of the bloodstream into the cells. And if we're having trouble with metabolic processes, often insulin will rise. And that's called insulin resistance, which is basically a sign that the body's having trouble processing glucose to energy, metabolic dysfunction. And so the glucose will rise in the bloodstream and the insulin will rise in the bloodstream. I love to see liver function tests, which is AST and ALT. These are liver enzymes. And the reason those are important is because the liver is like the center of our metabolic health. It's the first place to get food nutrients from the digestion. It's directly connected to the pancreas, which produces the insulin. It's part of digestion. We want a pristine liver. And so knowing that your liver tests are quite good is a really good sign that your liver is not overwhelmed. And then I love to see a CRP, which is an inflammatory marker. And the reason an inflammatory marker can be valuable is because when the body's not making energy well, when we're actually having trouble powering our cells, it's actually a profound danger signal to the body, because an underpowered cell is one that is going to actually be in distress. And so that can trigger the immune system to come to the ready. And so we can see CRP go up. And there's a few others, but those are some of the key ones. I like vitamin D. I like LDL and ApoB, which tell us about cholesterol, but that's kind of, with 10 to 15 tests, and I explain all of them in my book and they're on the web, the optimal ranges and what they all mean. That was sort of a brief overview. You can start to see, is metabolic dysfunction or suboptimal energy production at play in my body? And it's actually, I would say it's not a bad thing if you have a chronic symptom and you find out that there's a suboptimal metabolism. That's a good thing, because that's something that you can actually readily improve and you can track it. It's something, I think some of us, the reason it's so hard with our chronic symptoms, the migraines and the psoriasis and the eczema and all these things, it's like because we don't know what we can do about it. Do we have to be on medication forever? So this is an area where you can intervene, and hopefully it will have a positive effect on whatever chronic symptom you're dealing with.
I'm so excited to share something that has been a game changer for my business. As a nutritionist and a health professional, having an online presence that truly represents my brand is crucial. I built my website on Squarespace nearly 10 years ago now, and I'm so excited to partner with Squarespace and share with you the all-in-one platform that helps entrepreneurs and health professionals like us thrive online. Now, when I started to think about building my website, I was a bit overwhelmed. Now, you don't need to worry, because the Squarespace Blueprint AI makes it easy. It feels like having a personal design assistant guiding me through creating a site that looks professional and uniquely tailored to my brand. It's been amazing for showcasing my services and connecting to you, my audience. One feature I love is the members' sites. I've set up exclusive sections for my inner circle members to access premium content like courses, recipes, books, and expert blogs. It's a fantastic way to offer extra value, build a stronger community, and generate steady income. And let's talk SEO. Squarespace has built-in SEO features to help make sure my website is optimized for search engines, making it easier for people to find my site and join my community. If you're a health professional or brand looking to elevate your online presence, I highly recommend Squarespace. It's been vital for growing my brand and making real impact. Check out squarespace.com/livewell for a free trial. And when you're ready to launch, use the offer code LIVEWELL for 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. I think that's the most powerful kind of thing that we can actually take back our health, because sometimes these conversations can feel very heavy. And I know that because I had a father who was diagnosed as type 2 diabetic about 10 years ago. And for me, I was just starting studying nutrition. So for me, I took it very seriously in wanting to kind of help him get off metformin and go on his own journey back to good health. And, you know, today, touch wood, he is not on any medication and he's reversed his type 2 diabetes, which is amazing. Coming from a generation where, you know, he didn't think that was possible, and the healthcare system, you know, helped him as much as possible, but not in the way that to reverse his diabetes. And I think like knowing that we have these markers, if there's only 6.8% of the population are in these kind of markers of health, then it's really kind of empowering to know that we can do these things to get us back there. Because I think a lot of the time we come up against this kind of overwhelming information. We're not sure what we're meant to be doing. We're not sure which way we're turning. And I say that because there's a statistic in your book, which I resonate a lot from the listeners who reach out to me, who say 59% of people report that conflicting information about nutrition makes them doubt their choices. And I can even resonate with that. Being a registered nutritionist, sometimes I am even overwhelmed. And I'm thinking, well, it's such a confusing landscape. So thinking about these kind of biomarkers and being able to access that today, and again tuning into our body, which I think is so fundamentally important. I think a lot of us can switch off that response quite easily just to cope, because it's a coping mechanism for so many people to kind of get through. Kind of putting these together, when it comes to food, what's kind of the next step protocol? Because I know for you, and this is what I love about your book, you did share a lot of your personal story within the book. And I'm just going to kind of explain it here a little bit, where you kind of went back into your last year of medical school. And you said that you experienced so many struggles going back into that environment, such as IBS. Like I don't think you had a regular stool for like 2 years, which really shocked me when I read that. Acne all over your face, and so many other symptoms that were kind of coming up. And I think many listeners listening to this will also relate to that. So thinking about all of these mild symptoms, or maybe not even mild symptoms, that are appearing, when we're looking at food, which I'm very passionate about, what food is going to be nourishing us? What food should we kind of be pushing more towards? I know many of us are aware ultra-processed food should be out. But again, in this kind of conflicting health space with so many voices, what are the foods that are going to nourish this good energy?
Yeah, I think you nailed it on kind of the less fun part of the conversation, which is what we have to take out, right? Everyone wants to hear like that, but that is the truth. Ultra processed food, if there's one thing we know about nutrition, it's that the ultra processed food, it's hurting our cells. And I think about ultra processed food as like, it's an experiment that has failed. And we think we take it for granted that it's normal because it's like all over our shelves, but it's actually only about a 75-year-old experiment, this ultra processed food. And it's failed. It's ruining our soil. It's ruining our planet. It's also damaging our cells. So best thing anyone can possibly do is just basically reading labels and moving away from the foods that include the ultra-processed refined grains, the ultra-processed refined sugars, added sugars, and the ultra-processed refined industrial seed oils that are made in factories, because these things are not supporting our cellular health. So that's the stuff to take out. But I think the more importantly, like you asked, is what do we put in? And I like to think about it, you know, from the standpoint of very first principles, like what do the cells what molecules do they need to function properly? And then ideally, we'd put that stuff in the body through our food. And some of the things that we know really help our cellular biology, I think there's 5 main ones that I think about that I actually try and include in almost every meal. And I think about omega-3 fatty acids, at least one source of omega-3 fats, a rich source of antioxidants and micronutrients, a good source of probiotics, so actually live active cultures, healthy protein, and the last one is fiber, which is basically feeds our microbiome and then lets our microbiome make a bunch of amazing byproducts that then go into our bloodstream and support our health. So the way I actually stock my kitchen and I've developed recipes and how I cook and think is taking 4 or 5 of my favorite sources of each of those things and just making sure they're always at the ready at my house. And then when I make a meal, it's basically like mixing, matching from those categories. So for probiotics, I love kimchi, sauerkraut, miso, Greek yogurt, and kvass, which is like a low sugar kombucha. For healthy protein, I love ground elk and bison and venison and pasture raised beef and eggs and lentils and beans. So I've got those in the freezer or the pantry. For micronutrients and antioxidants, it's all the colorful fruits and vegetables from the store or the farmer's market, plus spices and herbs. But basically really colorful, fresh stuff. For fiber, I fill my house with beans and legumes and nuts and seeds, basil seeds, hemp seeds, flax seeds, chia seeds, sprinkle those on everything. And omega-3s, I've always got wild caught salmon and mackerel and, sardines in my pantry. I've got omega-3 rich eggs. I've got, hemp seeds and flax seeds and chia seeds, which are good plant-based sources. So I kind of have this mental list of these different foods and then put them all together. And I know that if I can ideally get one food from each of those categories in each of my breakfast, lunch, dinner, I'm going to do a lot to meet the needs of my cells in terms of metabolic health and really give them what they need. And there's a lot of controversy, obviously, about nutrition. I mean, a carnivore would hear that and say, oh my gosh, what is she talking about? Fiber's terrible. And, someone keto might say that you actually don't need any of the fiber or something like that. But so there's a lot of controversy. But what I always say is these 5 things in so much research, we know that support the molecular, both structure and function of cellular biology. But you don't actually have to take my word for it. Like no one listening has to actually take my word for it. You can try, I would say, any whole foods, unprocessed diet that is diverse and has lots of nutrient-rich food, and then track your symptoms and track your biomarkers. And I always say, if you're feeling incredible and you wake up with energy and joy and really no chronic symptoms, and your biomarkers, your key biomarkers are in the optimal range across all the metabolic biomarkers and other hormonal biomarkers, then you're probably on the right diet for you. But I can't see those things in the person listening. And so we should really get in touch with actually, we can cut through a lot of the nutrition controversy by becoming more familiar with our body awareness and our key biomarkers, tracking those regularly, and being able to be certain that the strategies we're doing are working for us. And so when someone comes at you on social media saying, oh, what are you doing? Why are you eating fiber? That's inflammatory. Beans are inflammatory. You can say, well, I've checked my inflammatory marker and it's super low and all my autoimmune markers are negative. So I actually feel and I have no symptoms and I feel amazing. So I'm actually very comfortable with my beans and my legumes and my seeds. So I think that can be quite empowering for cutting through the noise, is like focus on a whole foods, high quality strategy that fits with your belief system and your values. Ideally, I think it would be valuable for everyone to include those 5 components that I mentioned based on what I know about the research. And then track your symptoms, track your biomarkers. And if things are moving in the right direction, that's a great sign.
My number 1 rule is that health should be personalised and tailored to the individual. But it can be hard to do if we don't know where our current health status is. Are you someone who's been trying countless supplements and health trends but end up feeling no different? Before you even start thinking about these things, it's crucial to assess where your health status currently is. That's where OptimallyMe can make a world of difference. OptimallyMe is a health optimization platform that provides personalized health recommendations based on your unique biology and goals. It offers access to a variety of diagnostic blood tests, digital tools, and devices, helping you see the bigger picture of your health, whether it's metabolic, gut, hormone, mental, skin, or cardiovascular health. This is where your foundation of health should start, with the understanding of where it currently stands. What I love about OptimallyMe is it allows you to analyze your health biomarkers and personalize your health journey. You can start your personalized journey with the full body MOT and DNA epigenetics blood tests. These tests assess multiple areas of your health and determine how lifestyle and environment are aging your body. Once you have your comprehensive health overview, you can start to connect your wearable devices and work with expert health coaches using the OptimallyMe dashboard to support your health. And here is a little something for you. Use the code LWBW20 to get 20% off your order, because your health is personal and so should your health plan. I'm really glad that you kind of mentioned there just a generic overview, which is really helpful for people, whole foods, because I think sometimes when people hear such a different range of foods, they can feel overwhelmed or shameful that they're not kind of having that approach. And I think that, and then again, with the conflicting information online of what everyone should be doing, it can just make people feel disheartened to not even start. And something that I think a lot of people can struggle with, that I really want to approach, because you put it into your book and I loved it, was food cravings. Now, we just mentioned about what we shouldn't be eating. And I always say that because I don't kind of try to label any food as bad, but ones that we shouldn't be including as much. But then a lot of people will come back with, I'm addicted, or it makes me feel good, or I can't stop, or I don't care if I live 5 years less, I want to enjoy my life. And so there's this kind of like other nuance of a conversation happening there in a gray area, where people say, well, this makes me happy. And I thought it was really important to kind of highlight, because these are kind of real conversations that I think everyone has. And I know when I'm on my menstrual cycle, I just want to devour chocolate and pizza all day long, which my listeners might be really shocked about, but that's what I love. And so I think there's that conversation to be really mindful about. What do you say to those people that are listening and saying, oh, I can't eat like that every day, or I don't want to eat like that every day? Like, what's your kind of answer to that?
Yeah, it's a great point. And I kind of come back to thinking about, I think something that really motivates me is just knowing that there is a probably 10 to 20 trillion dollar global industry of ultra processed foods that desperately want us to feel that way. So for me, getting into a little bit of my resistant indignation about being controlled by industry actually really motivates me, because it's like the food is a lot of the ultra processed food that we think is bringing us happiness and we think makes us feel good. It's actually bioengineered to hijack our reward circuitry in our brain and cause us to desperately want it. And that is scary to me. And so I think just knowing that these foods, a lot of the scientists who were part of developing the addictive nature of cigarettes, once cigarettes went out of favor, they went over to the food industry to try and make food as addictive as possible. And so we're unfortunately at the mercy of these very large industries that want us to feel so gripped by our desire for these ultra processed foods. And something that also feels very empowering to me is that when we focus on trying to get as much whole, nutrient-rich food into our bodies, a lot of our cravings will actually effortlessly start to go away. And the reason for this is all biochemistry. A craving from the body, like a craving for something, is a sign essentially that the body's needs are not getting met, because food is our way of essentially bringing molecules into the body to meet our cells' needs. And if their core needs are not being met for micronutrients, antioxidants, proteins, whatever it is, the cells in their infinite wisdom and the microbiome in its infinite wisdom will literally change our hormonal milieu to drive us to eat more in hopes of getting us to eat what it needs. And so unfortunately, because 70% of the food is ultra processed, nutrient depleted junk, basically, we keep eating, but we're not meeting the needs of our poor body. And so a way to short circuit this is actually like, let's say you're not quite ready to give up that food you love, you know, the processed food that you love. That's fine. I get that. It's very hard. These grips are strong, but try to front load your meals with as much sort of like whole food as possible, like the pasture raised eggs or chicken or really beautiful, colorful, fresh vegetables or this, you know, the salmon or something that's really filled with a lot of nutrients, because those nutrients are going to go into the gut. They're going to bind to the molecules in those foods are going to bind to the nutrient sensing cells of the gut, which then go on to release satiety hormones that travel around your bloodstream and lift that grip of like, oh my God, I need this food. So I think about how can I, even if I do want, you know, the treats and this and that, how do I actually load the body with these as many nutrients as possible from whole, fresh, ideally organic foods, because those are going to have even more nutrients per bite that can actually stimulate my cells to produce the hormones that make it that I don't even have to have the willpower, because my body just then doesn't have the grip. It like the satiety hormones invisibly float through our bloodstream, and all of a sudden we don't want the thing that we thought we wanted so much. So kind of putting in the good stuff to help make it easier. And then the second piece I would just say is there's been research as recently as like last year in Nature Metabolism, a premier journal, that showed that when we eat very sugar and refined carbohydrate rich foods, so basically processed foods that have added sugars and refined grains, those are going to quickly increase our blood sugar because they just are rapidly absorbed. And we get this big glucose, you know, spike. And a single glucose spike, you know, not a problem for our long-term health. But for most of us, we're having lots of glucose spikes because of the processed food. Well, what the paper showed was that when we have that big spike, it's often followed by a big crash. And that crash is called postprandial hypoglycemia. A lot of people think they deal with hypoglycemia, but in fact, what's actually happening is they're having a big spike that's then crashing. And hypoglycemia actually drives us to have cravings. The reason hypoglycemia drives us to want more food is because a blood sugar crash to the body is very scary. The body really wants to bring the blood sugar back up to normal. So the paper showed that the extent of post-meal dips in glucose, that reactive hypoglycemia, predicted how much people had cravings for high calorie, high energy foods over the next 24 hours. So the moral of the story here is that getting rid of some of our cravings might be as simple as learning to balance the blood sugar spike, which we can do through a lot of simple strategies. Jessie, Glucose Goddess, talks a lot about these, but
she's been on the show.
Even like, yeah, she's amazing. But like, actually, it's not so much about depriving yourself of the thing that you really want. It's about finding a way to inspire the body to make you not even want it altogether. And part of that can actually be balancing our blood sugar, which means maybe adding protein more to your meals, adding more fiber to your meals, more healthy fats. All of these things slow digestion, slow our absorption of sugar from our food. Eating vinegar before your meal, which improves insulin sensitivity, walking after your meals to help take away some of that glucose, but basically adjuncts that balance the blood sugar so that we don't have the crashes, which then lead to more cravings.
I think that paper that you referenced might have been done by Zoe. Maybe it was because Dr. Sarah Berry's come onto the show a couple of times, might have not been, but she talks a lot about, and we've had her on talking about the big dippers, which, you know, when you go up and you crash down very, very, you know, very quickly, which is not what we want to be doing. And I love that you've mentioned about that, because it can feel really uncontrollable when you get those cravings, and understanding like the mechanisms as of why. But even just mentioning about like these mild symptoms that we might not be recognizing, having that awareness if you are feeling actually you crash very quickly, it's a really big kind of sign of what you've just been talking about, that you're not in this kind of good energy balance in our cells, which is, I guess, one of the most important things to recognize. I want to also mention, before we kind of go on to the next area that I want to cover, a bit about, your journey into this, because I know I kind of mentioned it very briefly in the beginning, but I mean, maybe even just before this, connecting about Sedona, this very spiritual healing place, which I've just naturally become quite interested in recently. But, I can see your passion when you're talking to me about this. And I really honestly, understand from myself that you go into this type of work and wanting to communicate this awareness because of you have a mission within you, and it's very personal. And I think I'd love for you to share this about your mum and the reason why you kind of left surgical training and went into more prevention, because I think a lot of people are going to relate to the different areas that you're going to speak about with your mum. So I'd love for you to kind of touch that with our listeners.
Yeah. So, I think with many people who kind of take big right turns in their career, a lot of it comes down to personal experiences, not just the intellectual knowledge, but also something that has happened to them. And for me, so much of it was around my mother, who tragically, died far, far too early from really what is metabolic disease, and just so many years of missed warning signs with a healthcare system that just doesn't think about root cause aspects of disease. So she was one of those patients that I think many people can kind of relate to, of faithfully seeing all her specialists. She saw the cardiologist and the endocrinologist and her primary care doctor and, all her OBGYN, and was seeing all the doctors, taking all the medications, going to all the appointments, but she never actually healed. She was being managed, but not healed. And so with my mom, she had me when she was a little older. She was 40 and I was a huge baby. I was almost 12 pounds, which is very large. No one really said anything about that. They're like, congratulations, you had a big, healthy baby. She had trouble losing the baby weight. She had a really tough menopause. In her 60s, she, ended up getting a little high blood pressure, a little high cholesterol, a little high blood sugar. And the doctors are all like, that's very, very common for postmenopausal women. It's fine. Here's some medication for each of them. And then when she was 72, she had some stomach pain and she went into her doctor. They ordered a CT scan and she had stage 4 metastatic pancreatic cancer. And she died 2 weeks later after that CT scan. And her doctors, and this is really, I think, what highlights the real problem with our healthcare system, is that her doctors at the time of her death, they said, oh my gosh, we're so sorry. This is so unlucky. It's so, so, so unlucky. And I think, yes, in our conventional Western system, of course it seems unlucky, because to them and to the way I was trained, at Stanford Medical School, each of these things is separate. Having a big baby, having a bad menopause, having the high blood sugar, high cholesterol, hypertension and cancer. But through a different set of goggles that we all could be wearing right now, based on what the science is showing us, we could actually be looking at what are the connecting points between all these things? What actually links them all? And what links them all is metabolic dysfunction. They're all connected to metabolic dysfunction, even having the extra large baby, which is an early sign of insulin resistance. Because if my mom has insulin resistance, a blood sugar problem, what happens is the insulin can't cross over to the baby, but the high blood sugar does. And that actually makes the baby insulin resistant. And insulin is our fat storage hormone. It's an anabolic hormone. So the baby ends up packing on fat. And having an extra large baby, which is called fetal macrosomia, is a very clear warning sign that both the mother and the baby are higher likelihood to go on to develop things like diabetes and blood sugar issues, which is, of course, what happened with both my mother and I. I was a very overweight child, and my mom ended up having, increasingly worse metabolic issues. So it's really a story of the missed warning signs that are happening all throughout many of our lives in the Western world that all get siloed into different offices, different specialists, different meds, to the detriment of us actually ripping up the plant from the roots and actually getting rid of the issue by focusing on what really matters, which is fundamentally building metabolic capacity in the body. So that's really, what continued to evangelize me on my mission of, how do we actually transform the system with a new set of goggles that look at root causes rather than just symptom management? Because I think about all the ways I would have counseled my mother differently, like knowing what I know now. It sounds like you had the opportunity to intervene with your dad in such a positive way. But for me, unfortunately, it was just too late. But I look at my mother, who is someone who she tried to exercise. She had a trainer and she worked out twice a week. And so she felt like she was checking off the exercise box, and she, tried to eat healthy, but she was doing sort of the more like packaged processed systems, like, where they ship you these boxed foods because of the calorie is a calorie mindset, and kind of trying, but not hitting the mark because it wasn't really through that lens of supporting metabolism. It was all about like, sort of, okay, yeah, I'll eat less calories. Yes, I'll exercise a couple times a week. But I would have said, actually, to support our mitochondrial health, you need to actually be walking. Yes, exercise a couple times a week, but you actually need to be moving your body all throughout the day. We need to get you up and moving every 30 minutes for at least a couple minutes. We know that that's really good for metabolic health. And we need to focus on your sleep, which of course our doctors weren't talking to her about sleep. We need to focus on making sure you're going to bed at a consistent bedtime and a consistent wake time. Never something that came into the conversation, but we know that's actually very important for metabolic health. I would have said, don't do any of these like boxed food systems to try and get you to eat 1,600 calories a day. Let's just focus on totally whole organic foods and, really give your body the nutrient it needs to be healthy. I would have had her clean up her personal care products that she didn't know that these toxins in our cleaning supplies and lotions and shampoos have an effect on our mitochondrial health. So I would have just totally approached it differently with her. And I think that's the message of the book, is for people to really know, like, what are the key things that matter for metabolic health? So we're not just like shooting darts, at the dartboard, hoping that something lands on the right place.
Honestly, as you're kind of explaining this to me from even the very beginning of her giving birth to you, and maybe having this information also delivered to her from a health physician, which I don't want in any way say that, health physicians deliver this in a heavy manner, because they do it in the way that they have to do it and that they're trained to do it and that they have to be truthful. But we had Ellen Langer on the show recently talking about the mindful body, and obviously her work is incredible. And even just the delivery of how you're telling someone, I mean, obviously saying you've got a couple of weeks to live or you're at stage 4 pancreatic cancer immediately makes you know that, okay, well, my life's over. Or actually, you're in such a bad phase of your high blood pressure or a cancer or Alzheimer's or whatever that is, the message on how that's delivered does have a reaction on how your body copes with that information delivered to you. And I'd really highly recommend anyone who's not gone to listen to the Ella Langen episode with us, please do, because you spoke about it in the very beginning, right? The one part of tuning into your body and connecting with it, which it sounds like, that's something that sadly your mother just thought was normal because of the information that was given to her. So she never decided to kind of explore that. But then secondly, that mind connection, which you've mentioned, every cell is listening, the danger response of how we talk to ourselves. And I think it's something really important to highlight here. It's not just how we talk to ourselves, it's how we process the information that is delivered to us. So how can we start cultivating that sense of safety in our minds around this and kind of safeguard ourselves? I guess in a way, I'm trying to get to that question, because I don't think we think about this as much as we should, but it's such a fundamental part of our health.
It is. I mean, this is the idea of cultivating that good energy in our minds so that our bodies can feel safe. And I think there's this fascinating aspect of biology that I certainly never learned about until more recently, which is this idea called the cell danger response, the CDR. And it's this idea that inside our cells, we think of, in terms of metabolism, we think of this key part of the cell that does the metabolism called the mitochondria, which again, people might remember from high school biology. It's the powerhouse of the cell. The powerhouse, yeah. Converts food to energy. It's such an important, incredible... Exactly. Yeah. We all had a song or something to remember this, but it really couldn't be more important. And we think of it as the powerhouse of the cell, but it actually does a much more complex set of functions. It is the the motherboard of the cell. It actually is taking in every potential danger or threat signal from around the cell and basically deciding how do I actually channel resources to help here. And so if there's a sign of danger on any level, toxins, psychological danger, really anything, undernourishment, not enough micronutrients to sort of like power the different enzymatic processes in the cell, anything that senses that things are not quite right, the mitochondria will actually totally change its energy production and really promote the pathways of the cell that are defense and alarm pathways, which, because it's sort of a zero-sum game of resources, will take energy away from just function and homeostasis and building and repair. So this is where it really gets into the psychological piece, because I think there's so many abnormal parts about modern living, like our phones and our screens and our ultra-processed food and the fact that we're surrounded by toxins in our water and air. It's all unnatural. But maybe the most unnatural thing about living today is the fact that because of technology, we are constantly being fed fear-inducing messaging and media like 24 hours a day. I literally have to like go into my phone and change the settings so that my home screen doesn't have news articles about people being murdered somewhere 1,000 miles away. It's like, it's just omnipresent. Billboards are about car crash attorneys, and social media is telling you about how the toxins are going to kill us all. It's just so much. And so I think both because of what's coming into our eyeballs and our ears, there is constant threat being said to every single one of our cells. And again, it's so unnatural and we take it as normal, but just like ultra-processed food, this is like a 30-year experiment, probably less. I mean, smartphones are 15 years old. It's an experiment. And just like processed food, it's an experiment that has failed. We know depression rates are skyrocketing. Anxiety rates are skyrocketing. Chronic diseases are skyrocketing. Children have astronomical rates of mental health issues now. So we have to basically do whatever we can to protect ourselves from this overwhelming messaging that our world is not safe. And that does not mean putting your head in the sand. It doesn't mean, tuning out to the realities of the world and being ignorant. It means knowing and deeply believing that our cells are going to respond to all of this information in a way that is not really conducive to our health. So to me, that means setting a lot more boundaries with my technology and what I choose to look at and hear. And especially as a woman, we look at infertility rates going up drastically. It's like, I'd like to have a baby in the next couple of years, but I think about, my body is so exquisitely designed to allow me to basically be fertile if it seems like the world that the baby could come into is one of resources and safety. So, how do I actually manage my environment in a way that tells my body that it's a world of safety and nourishment? So that's one. And I think the second piece is, I think we're never going to be able to feel fully safe in the world because we're all going to die, and there are violent things happening in the world, and like it's never going to be utopia. So then it comes to the second part of it, which is how do we actually implement strategies in our minds that no matter what's happening on our devices and no matter what's happening in our families or our communities, that we find ways to cultivate a sense of safety inside our bodies, even if things are going to shit around us. And that comes down to a lot of the ancient practices of things like mindfulness and body scans and breath work and being out in nature and connecting with loved ones in person and physical touch that helps release oxytocin that makes us feel safe, and basically implementing all the mind-body strategies that help keep a sense of safety in the body. And I can't overstate how critical this part of our biology is, because again, our cells are hearing everything. So we've got to both, I think, in some way protect ourselves from the inundation of information that many industries want us to just be just totally glued to, and then also develop some of the strategies that help us create safety in our bodies biochemically through modalities like breath work and mindfulness.
Totally. I think you can probably see me looking down quite a lot because I've got your book and I was trying to get to the phase of the last kind of part in the book. Well, not the last part, but kind of wrapping up this kind of mind-body connection and understanding a lot about, I mean, you talk about death being your biggest fear, which I think we can all relate to, right? Whether it's the death of a loved one or death of ourselves and how we're going to pass away, whatever that is, there is a huge fear. And many people have different traumas and different fears that resonate with them in some way. But I love that you title it The Work, and you kind of got 15 different ones. And I'm going to just read through them because I think it's really nourishing. You've touched on a couple of them, but I think just to kind of people to hear this, it's really important. So you talk about, form a relationship with a therapist or a counselor, having someone to talk to. You say about tracking your heart rate variability, to understand whether it's like an Apple Watch or a Whoop or whatever that is, to figure out where that is. Practice breath work, which you've done. And I did that last week actually. And the biggest emotional release was unbelievable because sometimes we can't express it. And I think some people can really struggle with the therapist side of what you're talking about, but some people can allow this tension, this trauma that's been in their body to come out through the breath. And that's why I want to mention them all because, again, practice for mindfulness, which is really important. Then you talk about, yoga or Tai Chi, which is beautiful for moving energy around the body. I love this one, spend time in nature. So nature pills. And I think that is the most soothing thing where if we can kind of like widen our horizon, our view and not have it so narrow, it naturally reduces our stress response. So having that, this is great. This has been helping me recently. Read inspirational and thought-provoking books and texts about mindset, trauma, and the human condition. Because I think that resonates to me. And sorry that I'm just like reading this out, but I think it's really helpful to people, right? But it's, to me, that cultivates something that I am very passionate about, which is self-compassion, which one of the philosophies of self-compassion is to show that to be human, we're all imperfect. And so reading these quotes of, whether people are going through a pain or whether it's a mindset philosophy to get you through, someone else has been there, they've written it, they resonate, you feel quite seen. And I think that's such a fundamental part of creating this formula of a toolkit that you mentioned. Aromatherapy, which is beautiful, like thinking about things like citrus that can like uplift your mood, or lavender. And then writing, feeling stressed, get unstuck, set a timer and write it for 5 minutes. I think the essence of like journaling, which we talk about a lot, but I think having that as like a regular thing for 5 minutes a day just decompresses your mind and your thoughts. It's such a, it's so simple, but so powerful at the same time.
Yes. Out rather than in,
right?
Take it out of the body. Yes, exactly.
Take it out. And then and I love that you're using this word awe, but intentionally focus on awe and gratitude. And I think that is beautiful, right? Because we have this like negative loop that we can easily get into, and trying to rewire our kind of neuroplasticity to kind of the positives is really hard, but this is a really fantastic way of kind of getting there. And then one of my favorites was practice active self-love. And I think that for so many people can struggle with. I think many people listening to this, they might struggle with that philosophy of, well, that means that I'm selfish, or, I've got to be doing all these things for someone else, or what does that even mean? Like, how do I practice self-love? And I think even just kind of acknowledging, whether you're listening to this in the podcast, like how much self-love do you give yourself is a really important question, because I don't think apart from ourselves, no one asks us that question. So that recognition, I think, is the biggest step. And then this one was great, be less busy. And I thought, gosh, that is amazing. We're always on this like cycle, right, of needing to do things all the time. And giving ourselves kind of an off day, I think is really lovely. And then cultivating community, which I think is such a big thing. You speak about in there because of loneliness. And then you also mentioned about psilocybin treatment, which I think is quite an interesting one. And we spoke about quite a few times on the show. But I'd love to get your kind of thoughts on that, actually, because I think that's like a slightly off-kilter one that some people can feel quite worried about. And it's obviously not legal in the UK. But How does that work on a cellular level? Because the other ones I understand quite well, just reading them through, you can understand the mindset shift. And as you spoke about the mitochondria, and then it kind of like navigates these specific pathways on where the energy is going to go. But how does that work with the psilocybin? Like, how can that help you reset your metabolic health?
Well, I mean, one thing that I'm desperate for is to see people doing more studies on how psychedelic assisted therapy, specifically psilocybin, which is magic mushroom, so a totally natural compound from the earth, how that impacts metabolic health. Because I think what we're going to find is that for a lot of people, it may actually be an unlock for getting healthier, because fundamentally the mechanism by which it's acting and improving things like depression and PTSD, which has been shown in top tier research in the US, Johns Hopkins, is because it promotes neuroplasticity. It helps your brain essentially rewire and to be able to create those new neural connections and kind of get out of those repetitive psychological loops that I think we can get into. And so I think in many ways, I think that where psilocybin can be helpful is, and I'll just speak to my own experience, which I write about in the book, is that it kind of blows up your framing for what's normal and how the universe is sort of structured. You know, it's like we live and we just, you know, most of the time are kind of in this plane thinking like this is what reality is. And in an experience with a psychedelic like magic mushrooms, it can show you very temporarily that there is actually so much more to perception than is in our daily life, and that your brain actually has the power to cultivate a totally different reality. And to even have that knowing for 3 hours of like what I'm experiencing day to day is not the only thing that's here, because my brain could create an entire different reality. That to me is a doorway to knowing that there is something else possible than what we think is reality. So for instance, if there's a relationship in one's life that you just feel like this is the way it is, and this is the way it's always going to be, and this is just patterns that I'm just stuck in this rut, having that kind of blown up for 3 hours and think, actually, there's a whole different reality that is possible. And it's not going to fix the issue, but it's going to open a doorway to know that there's a different reality that's possible. And then, you know, obviously it's not the type of thing that you're going to be doing every day. And so I think then it's the daily practice of thinking different thoughts and believing that something different is possible that can be really, really empowering. I think so many of us, I can speak for myself, when we don't make the progress, it's because we don't even believe we can make progress. We don't even believe that there's a different reality that's possible. So I think that's kind of the explosion that can happen is essentially one of possibility and imagination. And then I'm sure there's a lot of other, you know, neurochemical things happening, but the research has been profound. Many psychologists and psychiatrists are saying the research in this field of psilocybin for depression and PTSD is some of the most promising they've ever seen in their whole careers. And it's been very much demonized by the, you know, Western medical system. And I think in part that has to do with some of the poor incentives in our healthcare system, because a patient who's on a depression medication like SSRIs, you know, the SSRI is not curing the depression, it's managing the depression. And someone's going to be essentially a repeat customer for potentially years or decades. A medication that promotes neuroplasticity is one that actually could potentially change the whole pattern and wiring that's leading to the depressive symptoms. And so in a way, it could be creating essentially a non-recurring customer, because it actually may get more to the root cause. And in its ability to help create a different reality and to promote, I think, self-love, which is another thing that people often express that they feel from these experiences, just an overwhelming sense of total connection with everything else in the universe. And that is a really like loving sense that's expressed a lot by people who take these types of medications or plant medicine. In that self-love, I think it helps make the journey. So both self-love and love for others, can make the health journey a little bit easier, because as opposed to rooted in fear and scarcity and attachment to a specific outcome, it actually helps us shift towards our behaviors coming from a sense of love and interconnection with everything and everyone else in the universe in a more eternal pattern, lifts some of that existential angst that sometimes drives us to make some of the unhealthy decisions in our life. So that's kind of my 5 minutes on psilocybin.
But I love it. I think a lot of it, like that self-love that you were saying, through that, I guess it gives us a sense of worthiness, right? Because sometimes we make these decisions in life, whether it's for our mental health or it's for our physical health. You know, a lot of it is that we don't feel sometimes that we're worthy. So we don't make the effort to do this. And cultivating that self-love, or maybe having that other doorway, allows you to know that you are worthy. You are totally worthy of these things. And I think that's so fundamental. You know, I'd love to kind of wrap up this with that your main take-home tips that people can do, because we've really, you know, I've been writing so much down in this, like starting with joy and awe, and, you know, allowing yourself to have a whole food diet, and, you know, giving yourself gratitude during that, and being mindful during it, and looking at your sleep and walking like every 30 minutes. But what is kind of like the real things that people can start doing today to start connecting to this good energy that you're saying, things that are quite easy and get people on that track and to feel inspired? Because I think this is where it comes down to, isn't it? Getting people to take all this amazing knowledge that you've done and you've learned, but getting it into people's kind of everyday lives without feeling, as you said, overwhelmed.
Yeah. I mean, I think of all the things, like the simplest thing that we can do, like that actually people could start today with no purchases necessary or anything, is actually to just change our framing on this concept of exercise that I think we are really almost like addicted to in our culture. We're very, very laser focused on this concept of exercise as this like discrete bout of activity that's going to improve our health. And I think something that I've really learned from looking deep into the research is that I think in our obsession with this concept of exercise, we've actually forgotten that that is different than just building movement and motion into the everyday fabric of our lives by just moving more throughout the day. And when we actually move regularly, like you mentioned, every 30 minutes, maybe get up, walk around the house, do a couple air squats, do a couple push-ups, and keep our muscles active throughout the day in just a simple, free, low-grade way, what we're actually doing is we're moving glucose channels from inside the cell to the cell membrane to allow blood sugar to be taken out of the bloodstream and processed by the mitochondria. And we want that to be active all day. For most of us who are sitting 80% of the time and then maybe exercise at the beginning or the end of the day, we get the benefits of the exercise. But for those other 10 hours where we're really not moving much, we are keeping those glucose channels inside the cell, not doing the work we need them to do. So I like to think of this reframe of, you know, yes, exercise is great, but really what we want is to create a body in motion. And that is what's best for our physiology, which means, you know, really trying to get those 10,000 steps a day. And if it's not, you know, steps that you want to do, then at least trying to move your body and move the main muscle groups of the body every 30 minutes or so throughout the day, push those glucose channels to the membrane. So I think that's one of the easiest things people can do. And the research supports it. When we intersperse little bouts of activity throughout the whole day, people are actually healthier than the people who take even the same amount of time cumulatively and exercise for one bout during the day. So doing 30 minutes of exercise at the beginning and the end of the day versus breaking that 30 minutes up into 2 minutes every half hour, that's the latter is actually better for our health. So that's like one of the easiest, quickest ones. But, you know, we want to keep energy flowing through us and being processed and not stagnant and just moving a bit more throughout the day. I think it opens up a lot of that incredible transformation of energy processes that are dormant in so many of us today in the modern sedentary world.
Yeah, I think that constant movement is such a nicer explanation than intense exercise. But you can even reframe that, right? To think about protein. Are you going to have a better utilization of protein if you have like 30 to 50 grams in one sitting, or are you going to have better utilization of protein if you kind of have different things throughout the day? Similar to like if you're talking to yourself, are you going to have a better mindset if you're giving all your self-love in 5 minutes, or is it going to be better if you're saying it every hour? It's like that concept, right? It's like universal to everything. It's like spreading it out and like utilizing it in so many different areas, as opposed to just kind of this one intense burst where we're hyper focused. Could I just say, like, it brings you back to the original thing, like we lose the concept of joy because it's so intense and so hyper focused. It makes me think about revising for an exam. Like if I can think about different things throughout the month and like put little sticky notes around and I've constantly got it in my eyes view, that feels a bit more fun than like cramming in 3 hours really intensely the night before to make sure that I can remember everything. There's just like a philosophy of, I think, everything, right? It's kind of that balanced equilibrium.
Yeah. Yeah. We live in a very much a world of extremes right now. And I think, I think that getting back, and we're very much focused again on like productivity and efficiency. So I think that's part of the reason why we chunk and, we have these things on our to-do list to kind of get my 30 grams of protein, get my 1 hour of resistance training, get, et cetera, et cetera. And I think that when we actually do spend more time in nature, outdoors, we actually realize that like there's a slowness to the pace of how nature operates that ultimately is magically so productive. We get the flowers and we get the beautiful, plants blooming in spring, and it's all a very gentle, but ultimately massively productive cycle. And we somehow think we're separate from that and we have to just cram everything in and do everything. So I think it's like reorienting to our connection with nature, and nature's all about subtle nudges, that are consistent. And then we end up getting that beautiful flower. So I think finding ways to meditate on that connection, that we are actually a part of that. And when we defy sort of what everything else in nature is doing, we get sick. So just really getting back in touch with that true nature.
Totally. I love that. And it leads me to ask you, which I wonder if this is going to now be your answer, because that was just so beautifully put. But I ask this to all of my guests. And the final question is, Casey, what does live well, be well mean to you?
To me, what it means is all about connection. It means knowing that, I'm not an island. I'm not separate from everything else. My body is all connected. Every part of my body is connected. And, so many of these core miraculous processes like metabolism are, interconnecting all the functions of my body, in this amazing, beautiful, miraculous machine. I think about connection between, myself and everything else in the world. Like we've been talking about, like the air and the sunlight and the plants that create the oxygen that I need and other people, and just this beautiful connection between everything. And then also, about how important it is. We talked about loneliness, but like to connect in meaningful relationships with people that, make you feel safe, because that actually changes our physiology and is a potent stimulus to our cells to create that sense of safety that we know is so, so important. So really making the effort in our isolated world to actually be in person with the people you love and that make you feel safe, because that's actually going to change your physiology. So to me, it just really is all about connection, and that, the real act of resistance in our modern world that makes us feel small and scared and alone and busy and disconnected is to just really focus on trying to build both a psychology, but also really in our daily lives, build more of that connection. I think that's a huge part of the health journey that can make, the whole thing a lot more joyful, like how we started the conversation.
I know. I love that that's come full circle. I think it's kind of starting with that optimism of joy and ending with it. And I love that you've mentioned connection, because we're so interconnected in our bodies, and we also need that externally to also make us feel safe. I love that you emphasize something that I'm very passionate about, which is how that can change our physiology. And I think when we start kind of connecting to that a little bit more, that it's not just these kind of external outputs or verticals that we can do to change our physiology. It's also the fun things, such as like seeing our friends and seeing our family and getting rid of kind of relationships around us that make us feel unsafe and nurturing ones that make us feel more safe, that's when the good vibrations and you said the good energy comes. So I love that. I love that you mentioned connection. It's very high up on my pillars of health. Casey, thank you so much for coming on. You'll have to let us know when you're over in the UK. But please let our listeners know where they can find you, where they can buy your book, everything that you want to share with our listeners now, because I'm sure they want to go on and discover much more.
Oh, thank you. Well, the best place to find me is CaseyMeans.com. That's really where the hub of where all my different channels are linked. And then the book is really everywhere books are sold, Good Energy. I know that it's at the Waterstones in the UK, and then of course Amazon UK. So it should be out now when the podcast comes out. And then I also have a newsletter that comes out every Tuesday called Good Energy Living, where I share sort of my newest thoughts and musings. So encourage everyone to sign up for that too.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Casey, for dedicating so much of your incredible research to this book, and to also, speaking up proudly about metabolic health in a different sense that many people might have known, and also the joy that it can bring you and the joyful way to do it, which is not always how it's shown in kind of health. So thank you so much for bringing this to our eyes.
Thank you.